I look at the panel questions. Yeah, all right. So my first question is going to be about not the live stream because this is going to be very disturbing. My first question is going to be about some sweet thing that some of us might like in the future called marzipan. So it's going to be interesting if it at all comes outside and faster than the what is it called the charging AirPod thing that is not coming out. Air power, yeah. Well, so long for power. So because the question that I actually have, and anyone is free to start on this, is what do you think it's going to change? It's like obviously many iOS devs will jump on the Mac, and so obviously many let me use the word old Mac developer will be like all those people, they're gonna ruin our platform. But it turns out that I have a Mac app which is starting to be a little bit older, and I'm thinking the other way around. Actually, I'm thinking this is a good opportunity for me, for example, to put to move this app also on iOS and rewrite it from scratch because it's very old, and you know how software goes, right? After a while, there's no patching, there's just rewriting. And so, what are your feelings on this?
So I'm actually very sad because most of our pain as Swift developers is interacting with UIKit and AppKit and the Cocoa APIs. And what I was hoping was we would get a new blank kit that was very Swift friendly, and it would, at its foundation level, be on iOS and on the Mac, and then we'd see the different GUI elements. Yeah. So I was hoping that that would be the solution. So I'm actually very sad if what they're going to do is just make UIKit apps be able to run within some environment on the Mac. So I'm still have my hopes up because some of this depends on you know, ABI stability and having the same foundation both places, but this might be a nice stopgap.
That is a good point because iOS is actually, or actually UIKit is actually like 11 or 12 or 13 years old. If you go back at Apple, it's probably 13, 14 years old, so a lot of this stuff actually starts to feel AppKit-ish. So yeah.
I mean, I feel what Daniel here is saying, but I'm kind of expecting, like, looking forward to see if it's going to be useful for very complicated applications. Most of the examples we saw now as part of macOS was, I think, the Stocks app and the News and the Voice Memos app, which are, like, in most scales, pretty small. I'm wondering if Apple themselves would find themselves building something that's entirely portable that works on both platforms, but the more I come to think of it, it doesn't seem reasonable to have very, very complex app that works well on both platforms. So for me, I just don't see it as a viable solution, but I might, you know, eat my own hat later on, which is I hope to do. I just think that for the very basic data presentation tasks, it might be great for a lot of stuff, but for very complicated stuff, like I don't imagine Apple writing Final Cut Pro for iOS and macOS together. I just don't see it happening.
I mean, I think like strategically, again, I get your pain, but strategically it kind of makes sense. Like imagine learning in June that not only you can do Mac apps and iOS apps using the same framework, there's a new framework to learn on top of the fact that some things will work a little differently on a mobile device than on Mac OS. So I kind of get why they maybe didn't want to do it this too early, because I assume that some stuff will come out in the wash as we're forcing UIKit to run on Mac OS, and maybe from the rubble will emerge what we all dream of, which is a much better cross-platform UI library.
I think Daniel kind of nailed it for me at least, because it feels like a really big missed opportunity. If you've been doing Mac OS for a while, you know that it used to be pretty nasty back sort of 10.7, 10.8, and they've been improving it and refining it and pushing it and just bringing it closer and closer to the way UIKit works. And at this point, it felt like we were super close. Like a few more little changes around here and there, and it could have almost been compile again to get your code working. But they've thrown that away. And I don't understand why they are trying to keep two going. it doesn't make sense anymore. You know, the new App Store on macOS is built in AppKit. So clearly they believe AppKit's got a viable future, and UIKit's got a viable future on macOS. We don't want two API libraries on the same platform. That makes no sense. So I don't know where they're going with this. And you know, we're just seeing all those rumors about, you know, a new Swift-based UI framework. That would have been awesome, you know. Ditch Zibs, ditch storyboards, something great and new and lovely. And oh no, we're just going to put it on UIKit on there. Oh, thanks, Apple. That isn't very helpful.
Oh, one last thing. One last thing is that anyone that was to DubDub last year and saw that promo with the new windows and everything was sure it's going to be a new components library. Like, I was sure it's going to just be a revamp of how we build stuff on each of these platforms specifically, with more focus on macOS that really didn't get proper attention for a while. But then was kind of bummed to know that it was just moving UIKit to be used on macOS as well. Yeah.
So, by the way, in the meantime, we have the answer. Stefan actually felt a bit under the weather, so I guess he went back to rest. So we hope he will be back tomorrow.
And sorry for the shaming.
I hope you're going to apologize to him.
So
Apologize.
I'm not.
Apologize.
Apologize.
This is like, oh come on, it's like pressure. So there is a hot chair here. It's not actually a hot, but it's if anybody has a question or want to jump on the, if anybody is bold enough. Luckily, Alex from Bello is not here, so otherwise he would be already on the chair. It's a friend of us. Anyways, yeah. Anybody else? Because otherwise, I have another. Yeah, I just wanted to react on what you said about the symbolic of the WWDC announcement. Please, people in the world, stop thinking that they are trying to deliver a message with those things. They just gather a bunch of designers and they scrabble stuff. It never really means anything. It never really meant anything.
Yeah, I mean,
Sometimes it does, but yeah.
It does. I mean, there was something regarding UI. You know, that transition of UIKit to Mac was, I mean, it wasn't an announcement, but there was a theme around this, and I think that previous DubDubs as well, some of them didn't, but I think most of them had some conceptual, like some concept in the design. So, and you know.
It's
like
just because
guessing is always fun, I think. So
well,
that's also
yeah. I mean, it's just like what I'm trying to say is people shouldn't have too big hopes on the what it actually means, because a lot of time it doesn't mean a lot.
Wait, you mean that video of people teleporting with Apple Watch isn't real?
Oh gosh, yeah, I was pissed off. Well, I mean, watch. I mean, it's like it's not bold enough from them that they removed the. What was that? What was it called? The back in the time thing in WatchOS 4?
Time travel.
Time travel? They removed it in WatchOS 5. Seriously. I know Apple is famous for. I think I'm a little bit loud, right, Juan? Can you just put? Because I'm always loud.
Only Apple could give you a new ECG and you complain.
Yeah.
G on this tiny piece. That's it. Still blows my mind.
But I can't.
No. Well, that's the thing, right? I can like. But this is for the next generation. Yeah. Well, actually, it's not even in my question, but actually, my biggest hopes in so many years for the watch is actually for the next generation of a watch is at one point a camera, because I want to be that guy who like in the movie, right? Like in the who was doing the Flintstones or whatever.
You just don't have that.
Yeah, who was doing this? I don't know. I think in some random.
No one else wants that.
Well, they should build it for me.
No one.
Every time I see someone with an Android watch that does this, I'm like, what the
But this is going too far. There are some words we don't use here. the A words. So no, I want to react on the evolution of the size of the phones, the huge thingies, Maxis or whatever, and the death of the beautiful 4-inch phone. Actually, the death of the 3.5-inch phone, even back in the days. And so that's why when I was looking at my watch with Matthias, I was saying, dude, this is the only phone-sized watch that I have. That sounds weird. So they really they are on this trip of now. I think that now we can call it's over, the time of small phones. And on that same track, I wouldn't think I would have said that at one point, but I have the feeling that it also means that the future of I think I left the building. It's yeah. All right. I think the future of the tablets, or let's call them iPads, because tablets reminds me of my mother telling me I have a friend who has an iPad, but it's not from Apple. Is actually compromised because of the big phones. So it seems like. So what do you think about generally? Is anyone else sad than me that those tiny small phones are leaving the building? Tell me you are.
No.
Okay, next
I'm
question.
I'm basically pretty good with them not being that small, like a little stamp. So that's really good. But the new X Max, how's it called? I don't know. When I saw
10s Max.
yes,
10s Max. You have to be able to pronounce it.
Tennis
10s Max. Tennis. It's like tennis.
It's like tennis, and it's the
Max.
big one. Yeah. When I saw the screen where they compared the new screen of the Tennis Max to the classic phone, it's basically so that the screen of the classic phone is an app icon. Yeah. And this is ridiculous. And we really think, why do those phones need to get bigger? Because they are doing so much more. Do they really need to do this? But we want to have better cameras. We want to have those neuro something processors within it that we can make nice portrait pictures. So our demands are getting higher, or Apple thinks our demands are getting higher. And that's why I guess that's the goodbye of the mini phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead.
The mini phone. No, don't call them this way.
I think also it replies to the demands of the Asian market, because in the Asian market, in South Korea, China, they all use like super big phones, which we use much less in Occidental countries. So I think if they were not doing a very big phone, they would lose probably a lot of shares in these countries.
Yep. Why kill off the SE, you know? Why not have everything?
What do you mean?
Did they officially kill off the SE though?
They didn't.
No,
Kill
they
what?
didn't kill it off. That's
okay.
yeah, I don't think they did officially kill it off. That's what I was about to say, that yeah, there is a change that they want to make the screens bigger. But first of all, even the Max isn't bigger than the 7 Plus and the 8 Plus, so it's not a bigger physical size. And I mean, there were times in Apple's history when it all of a sudden went back to a smaller phone. The SE is a great example of that. That there was like.
Well, they didn't really went back. They
They
brought
just-
it somehow back from the graves because
Yeah,
more than
but-
one people were complaining.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. Like they could have continued making bigger and bigger phones. They made the 7 Plus, and then eventually they realized that people wanted smaller phones again, and they made the SE that looks like the 5, for that matter. Yeah, phones are getting bigger, but I don't think it's necessarily the end of. I don't think it's never going to get smaller versions again. I think some consumers still look for the smaller phones, and some people are still worried about the big footprint in their pocket, in a way.
And then again, when you have a watch, an LTE watch, there are so many times where you can just leave the phone at home and just leave with only the watch and AirPods, which is, from my opinion, actually. It's a very nice feeling to be outside without a phone, even though you actually have a phone.
Yeah, I mean, in countries that don't support like eSIMs, though, you don't get to enjoy the full functionality of actually streaming
What are
music
those
on your.
countries?
I can tell you. Yeah, so
Poland
we've got
again!
this third world country which doesn't support eSIM, if you wondered. But it will in future. But what I wanted to say is that the EC size was probably the best device I've already owned in my entire Apple career. It's like really, you can use it with one hand, and it's really beneficial and etc. But I'm worried that the whole tech advancement that was there, they made it. The new apps were not really too thought out for the smaller devices. So it was kind of hard to use. The developers didn't really like optimizing the performance for that, and I think the apps sector has degraded a lot for the smaller devices. So it's a pretty natural move to move out. So back away from that.
But you're mentioning something very interesting. So this one-hand factor is pretty big. And I wonder if this is a cultural thing, because when you say the Asian market loves those big phones, and they have, sorry, I think a bit smaller hands than the average European. So maybe this can really be kind of a cultural preference. So we want to have them, but the big masses don't need them.
Yeah, that might be right.
So you're trying to say it's not that the phones are too big, it's that we don't have enough hands?
Yeah, we should get bigger hands.
The Asians have enough hands for the big phones.
Maybe
so
they have 3, I don't
figure.
know. Yeah.
So this year's event I thought was very focused. And so when they gave us the 10S, the 10S Max, and the 10R, it was very focused on pushing people in a direction. I don't, and they still do offer older phones that are the old sizes. And that's,
well, but the 7 is the smaller one.
but the market that buys those smaller phones is not the ones looking to upgrade every year. So I don't think that they've, to your point, I don't think they've said they're not going to move back to small, but moving back to small with that notch is not something they were going to do this year. I think they're going to sell the heck out of the XRs, and I don't think they wanted to get anything in the way of that market right now. On the other hand, the iPad mini is the device I miss the most.
Oh, yeah.
And as the phones got bigger, someone at Apple said, well, we don't need the iPad mini anymore. That's a brilliant device that they've let sit for 3-4 years.
The price is not exactly the same also between an iPad mini and a 10s Max. But thank you for the notch thing, because this is actually, I mean, I love my iPhone 10, don't get me wrong, but it's just too big because the iPhone 6 that I had previously was too big already. So my dream phone would be an iPhone SE phone sized with the screen of the iPhone 10 and the notch.
If you remember the iOS 7 WWDC, it was a fascinating turnaround for Apple. Before that, the previous 6 years, it was like, you know, having textures brilliant, having wood grains amazing, having felt the bee's knees, right? It's all humanism, right? On iOS 7, it suddenly, that was never happened. It's all about flat and clear and clean and typography rules and so forth. But they gave a very coherent line. The line they gave at the sessions was saying, listen, in iOS 1, 2, 3, the whole idea of having a touchscreen with things you could do and touch and swipe was new to people. It was a completely revolutionary. So having these real-world analogies in there, in the screen, made it more natural to sort of transition across to that. And eventually, 7 years in, people were so comfortable with touchscreens. Of course, Android was huge at that point. Then they could switch to doing flat. And I think that the transitioning of phone size is something similar. If they'd come up with like a tennis match size phone originally, it'd have been a bit weird, like they've got this brick in my pocket, who wants that? Start small, look, it's so small and so nice, and then get bigger and bigger and bigger, and iterate. And now we as humanity are ready for the iPhone tennis match. We can all go and buy one and carry them in our huge oversized hands. At the same time, the iPhone 3GS, I think, or 4 was the last phone that fit in my wife's pockets. At this point, she doesn't care anymore. It's in a handbag because even the SE wouldn't fit. So she'll buy whatever's going. Size is now irrelevant.
Yeah, we just go ahead.
I wanted to just off topic. So since the iPhone 3GS, the pockets of women's clothes even got smaller. So
a reverse correlation between phone sizes and
this is a conspiracy. But by the way, to come back very quickly on the previous topic about marzipan, there is a good remark at the very top from Marius, which says that the good thing about marzipan would be that some apps...
It won't be.
Yeah.
It won't be. They're too lazy.
I don't know about lazy, but they did build an Electron app where they shouldn't have built an Electron app. Like, it's a memory hog, and I don't think that making it a marzipan
well, not
app
for them,
would make
but
life
not necessarily
easier.
for them, but maybe others will think like they would have chosen Electron, and maybe they won't.
To give you an idea of how bad it is, they had a new version this week saying, if you have rendering problems, just turn off hardware acceleration. Like, so it goes even slower, and that's the fix.
Who needs hardware acceleration anyways?
All you need is another gig of RAM to, activate the memory buffer for the virtualized hardware.
Yeah, also the marzipan is not really cross-platform, so I think it won't attach them too much.
Well, it's cross-Apple platforms.
It's cross-Apple platforms, yes. But if
that's
they
what
don't
Apple
care
means when they
Slack
say
right now,
cross-platform.
if they don't care right now, they won't care for that in future in Slack.
We're seeing a lot of the video apps are getting rid of their Mac client, and they're telling you to use Google Chrome as your Mac client, but they still have iOS custom clients. And so I wonder if that's a way of getting those apps back onto the Mac with custom clients. So, you know, a lot of the Netflix and a lot of those are, and YouTube is going to Chrome on the Mac, but they have their own custom on. So that's a nice way of getting them back.
Generally, it's kind of a love and hate story with the Mac, with Apple, since many, many years, right? It's like there used to be this analogy of comparing the Mac to being like the truck of the future, and so we developers will always have Macs. So potentially video people will always have Macs. But even on the creative world, if you look at everything which is feasible nowadays on an iPad, I don't know. So it looks like from Apple's perspective, a lot of time they are like losing some attraction on the Mac.
Well, and some of that's that they're so late with the Mac Pro, and so they've lost a lot of those people that need that kind of power.
Yeah.
It's very hard to tell that story when you're not delivering a top-end machine.
By the time they will deliver it, people will forget the name of this computer.
I think they're not forgetting that the Mac is what made Apple. Like, that's just the reality. Without the iMac, without the Apple II, there would be no Apple and there would be no iPhone. So I do think they don't forget that. I agree with Daniel that they're just late to the game so many times. I mean, even the latest MacBook Pro updates are not necessarily the newest CPUs. They don't necessarily have the best hardware. And I think that I always find myself excusing it because that the software is so good. Like that connection between the software and hardware is what makes the Mac so great. Not necessarily the fact that they have the best hardware, because we all know they don't. Yeah.
But
that's what I think.
it's hard for us to judge about this, right? Because we're just a bunch of nerds, so we obviously need a real computers. But out there is a lot of people which basically can do so much stuff with an iPad instead of a Mac. In many cases, especially with the big iPads, with the screen and with stuff like drag and drop and stuff like that, and 2 screens, blah blah blah, yada yada yada. So that is also to come back to my question about the future of the iPad, because if the future doesn't have an iPad, if the iPad doesn't have a future, which is the same, and the future doesn't have a Mac either for the general audience, does it mean that at one point everybody is going to do everything on the phone? Because my wife certainly does most of the stuff on the phone. It drives me crazy. She could probably do her taxes on the phone.
There's a fantastic Asimov, I believe it is, short story where it's set in the distant future where there's a permanent war taking place between 2 civilizations, and the entire war takes place via computer, super advanced computers fighting, predicting and fighting. And at the end of the story, one side figures out an advantage. They've discovered mathematics. Because they've forgotten so long ago, computers were built 10 millennia ago, and they've been fighting ever since. And they thought, we can do arithmetic, we can finally beat the other side. And I wonder whether Apple will go, iPad, kill it, rubbish. Mac, kill it, rubbish. iPhone's where it's at. iPhone. Make the iPhone bigger. Wait a minute, this tablet's quite nice. This could really work as a product, Maybe that's going to happen here as well.
And the funny thing, just to interject before, the funny thing is that, I don't know if you guys know, but the iPad was actually the first product before the iPhone, and they ended up not working on it further because it was too expensive. The iPad started because Steve was pissed off at seeing a tablet PC. So, and then like a couple of years later, they came back and did a phone because it was affordable, and so later they came back on the iPad. And now it's like a full circle where the phones grew to being iPads from the side, and so it's kind of a weird circle.
I still don't think you can really compare phablets, as they used to call them, which are phones that are sized as tablets, to actual iPads. I don't think they're going anywhere, and like the not so new iPad Pro at this point proved that. Like what you can do with a 13-inch iPad is insane. But on the other hand, you can't really do really professional applications on your iPad. You can't do professional movie editing. You can't do professional audio editing. You can do a lot of stuff that you couldn't do a year or 2 years ago, but you can definitely not do some of the things that are only reserved for high-performance Macs or computers, for that matter.
But
I don't know about this.
Is that because we can attach an external GPU to the iPad to get more juice, or there's simply this software simply isn't there, but potentially could be? Like,
yeah, there's a lot around this. Like it's connectivity, it's power, it's a bunch of things. yeah, file system. Like, will the future get there? Maybe, but I don't think we are very near to
Yeah.
that point.
There's one thing that I like, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Microsoft started with this thing, and then Android, which is the phone extending to a computer. And this is something Apple hasn't done yet, but I can totally see a future where this thing is actually mature, where we just plug the phone and basically have whatever, a keyboard, or in the meantime you can pretty much use a mouse on an iPad. Everything is there. So I don't know, but the fact of the matter is the phone is awesome when it's like a hub, but when you're back home, you want to have a bigger screen, for example, and a keyboard potentially.
But on the software side, we will have everything with Marzipan. Because imagine when we have a little device
Yeah.
where we plug our phone, we have the iOS version running on the phone,
Yeah.
and then we will have the Mac version running on this external little device. So basically, there would be everything in place. Because the phones are that powerful, I'd say, that they can run an enhanced version of the very same binary, even with this little extension, which can have more juice, or I don't know, more CPU, GPU power.
Yeah.
But with this extension, aren't you necessarily describing the handoff feature that we currently have? It kind of works this way already.
Yeah, but it's not exactly the same. I'm
But with the
confused by
Mac-
I'm confused by this big no on that slide at WWDC. Are we gonna merge the Mac and iOS? Because this no sounds like no. Actually, we don't want to tell you now, but maybe.
Like, who needs a
Like-
stylus? Oh wait a minute, we need a stylus.
Yeah. Yuck. Yeah. So I don't know. But then again, we still don't have the stylus on the phone because they're not big enough. It's only going to take 2 years until they are as big as an iPad Pro.
Don't you have the obvious question in mind with having Macs with touch screens? Because with iPad apps on
Like
the Mac,
Surface, like you mean?
yeah, kind of.
I don't know. The Surface is certainly successful. So I'm kind of confused in the meantime because I'm thinking about UI Stack View, for example, which is this. You said that, and when your presentation, Paul, at iOS Dev UK, UI Stack View is a new thing on iOS, and it was on Android OS 1, basically. So because we have so many different sizes and stuff like that, so sometimes I don't know where I am. I'm a little bit lost in the things that once were totally impossible to think of, and the reality nowadays. So yeah.
Touchscreen Mac's only a matter of time. It's going to happen, and they'll flick a switch, and all the Marzipan UI kit apps will switch to their native controls. Sliding date pickers and stuff. Do your finger. The touch bar has been a complete disaster. No one likes it.
I like it.
That'll be the first to the
That's
wall when
me
the
again.
revolution comes.
So we're two.
Yeah, but if you had a touchscreen Mac, you could do it with the entire screen. It's amazing.
I don't know.
They
I
keep
don't
on
know
saying,
if
oh
I
yeah,
wanna
you'll
be-
get Gorilla RAM. Well, somehow mysteriously everyone else with touchscreen PCs don't have Gorilla RAMs. So it seems to work out for them.
Yeah. Anyway.
About
go
the
ahead.
touch Macs, I also thought it was a really cool idea to have Macs with touch screens until I bought my wife a really cheap PC laptop that has a touch screen and saw that she barely uses that feature at all. And I think it really depends on how the software is going to change. The software world in general is going to change to make touch computers more useful. Because right now, not so much. I mean, that's why we have the separate touch devices and like the computers. Just because they were solved to build different interactions, different problems. I think the future is there, but I mean, it's definitely a software engineering issue or a product issue, really.
All right, let's switch a little bit subject. This is all too geeky for me. Let's be a little bit ethical. I want to speak about creepy technologies and dangerous technologies like face recognitions and whatnot, and all this stuff. It turns out, I mean, this is a little bit of my privacy thing, but not only privacy. It turns out I am concerned about all the potential stuff that we might be building, like. You all remember the story of the atomic bomb, and basically we are building with stuff like face recognitions, the next generation of such technologies. So our role as developers is going to be kind of tricky because we want to build awesome tech. We also want to be sure, and I don't think there is a way to be sure, that this isn't again, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, ruining the world or whatever. The sun is leaving now and then, right? Yeah. No, if I speak louder, I don't think it's gonna help. So yeah, so the number one thing is really actually like face recognition. And because the reason why I say this is because it turns out that and in other parts of the world they start using it in like train stations or whatnot, and they start filming everybody and like making matches of people. So it's a good thing for finding potential dangerous people, but at the same time it's at the sake of all of us being in a big huge database. Good.
Yeah. I agree with you that it's a very scary tech, but I mean, first of all, I think we're like when it first came out, people were excited because it was incredible that it works as well as it does now. But I do think there has to be an ethics aspect when you program. For example, DeepMind has AlphaGo, right? That software that plays Go, the game, against other players, and it beat the world's top player. And then they made this sort of consortium of people at the top of that field that make ethical choices around how to use that technology for good. And I think that there still isn't enough. I don't like the word regulation because that's not the right word. But I mean, there aren't enough social conducts and social rules about what you shouldn't do when you have that kind of technology.
I mean, I think it's pretty scary because we have this slightly frightening race to the bottom between the sort of commercial world, which is honing AI and not always thinking about what it's doing. And we also have governments who want to do crazy stuff with AI. And sometimes they know what they're doing. Sometimes, they're also being irresponsible. And it's definitely something that we should always be vocal about and make sure that this conversation doesn't die. Like for now, I think this is what we can do. Like the solutions are out there somewhere. We can talk about whether there's any government regulation that we can put on top of corporate companies, because it only takes one very bad company to do a lot of damage, especially because this technology is kind of like so easy to just install on millions of phones within days, sometimes hours. It's a pretty scary world out there.
And that's the stuff we can see. I mean, we can see some of these things are going to be issues, and we're worried about them, and we're worried about, as some people mentioned before, the health analysis. But if we look at what's happened with Twitter and Facebook and the unintended consequences as people start taking advantage of them in deep ways, I don't know that we will be able to control some of these things as they sort of move beyond what we anticipate, and we can't regulate them once they're out of the bag.
But there are already consortiums which are created in combination of governments and big corporates, and those ethical standards, they are basically formulated right now. And when you think back 20 years, did we have privacy laws? Not exactly, no. Because with the dawn of the internet, something completely new came on stage, and look what we have with GDPR now today. So those things need time, and I really hope that those topics are in good hands, and in other cases we have to add our thoughts on it.
So they also need like some kind of regulation. It's
I think whatever the solution will be, it might not be a single solution. So we need consortiums, we need some awareness in the government, and we need citizens to talk about it as well.
And not to be dark about this, but one thing we've seen in my country lately is a lot of these things that we thought we were being protected by the government was only while members of government sort of agreed to behave well. And when people decide to abdicate that and not behave by these norms that aren't legislated in, an awful lot of bad can happen.
That's true, but then the big corps really have to say no to a couple of things. So I know from Microsoft, they tiered down 1 or 2 engagements which with the US government on surveillance. So it's their ethical responsibility for some kinds to really say, okay, it's technical doable, it sounds super interesting, and it will be nice for AI algorithms, but we won't do it.
Yeah, and it's kind of happening. It's pretty slow, but we have GDPR in place in Europe, and it's kind of changing. So that's pretty good. I would like to just go on with this discussion about scary tech, because I'm really scared of IoT move, like Internet of Things. I'm really scared of putting a lot of small stuff that cost a small amount of money that are connected to the internet in my home, because whenever I'm using a phone or a computer, I can switch it off and unplug from the internet with like a whole lot of devices that are surrounding us, and that's the reality. They are pretty cheap, they are not maintained too well, anyone can access it, and this really scares me off. And I wouldn't like to use such a device programmed by myself, for example.
Years ago, there was a big argument about a famous Linux distribution called Ubuntu, which was run by a South African billionaire called Mark Shuttleworth. And people complaining, saying, Ubuntu does not do enough to contribute back to the community. Red Hat employs hundreds of people doing great work in a kernel and yada, 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 and Ubuntu doesn't. Ubuntu, you're very, very rich, do more, please. And there was a fantastic counter-response from people in the community saying, listen, I'm a full-time kernel hacker. What Ubuntu does for me is it makes my Linux box work. I haven't got to worry about, why is the sound not working, why is the Wi-Fi dead again? And that itself is a huge contribution, rather than a direct financial contribution. And I think that kind of indirect benefit or hurt is what's going to hit us most. Because no one's going to say, hey, you, build me a nuclear bomb. Hey, you, build me a dirty weapon. They're going to say, could you make my ML model slightly faster? Could you make my networking work better or more reliable? And 1,000 small things add up to one huge thing. Like recently, Strava realized they had mapped out US military bases around the world, because troops would hit the phone, go for a run, track the exercise, and go, look, they've got a little circuit around the base, and it's public information. That's the shape and exact layout of all these top secret bases around the world. And no one realizes that, because you don't realize it until it's kind of too late. And the only way to work with this has got to be government regulation, which in turn means having friendly governments, which in turn means voting.
Yeah. You go ahead, but just, Andreas, you let me know when we have to stop, right? Or you give me like 5 or 10 minutes when we... All right.
So yeah, I wanted to say that I think this privacy problem is going to get bigger and bigger with the AR glasses.
I was going
because it's pretty soon, in the upcoming years. And we're going to be constantly filming everything around us. This can be streamed constantly. This can be uploaded anywhere on Earth all the time. And AI can be used all the time to detect who's around us, if someone around us is a fugitive as well, and all of this with or without our control. So I think, and mixed, both of them also, we're not going to, at some point, I think it will be hard to distinguish actually the reality from the virtual world, because everything's going to be a mix of both of them. And these problems are very important to be taken care now, because they're going to just scale very quickly when these things arrive, and we're just wearing them constantly. Because you were saying you can still switch off your devices and live outside the virtual world, but I think at that time, if you're switching off your glasses, you're just going to be out of the world, because everyone's going to see something that you don't see, and you're just going to be, you cannot not wear it, just while you're sleeping. So I think it's a world that maybe it's still, it seems far away, but things are getting ready.
Well, this is why even us nerds have to learn to scale down lots of time. Like, get a dumb phone again, an amazing Nokia 1110 or whatever, and leave this world for the next 2 weeks and learn to live again like in the 80s.
I find myself only getting IoT devices that also have analog fallback. I would never, like, if I would get a digital lock that works with my phone, it has to be able to be opened with a key. I'm not going to install some, or a light switch for that matter.
So mine does, yeah.
So, so for the turning off thing, that is a bit kind of entering some confidence.
I need this because it turns out some people at my house don't want to open the door via Bluetooth. They want to open it with a key. And some others don't want to turn off the lights with their phone, but they want to switch. So that's exactly your point. I always need a fallback.
It's like any science fiction TV show where the brig is entirely a force field. Like, power goes down, the prisoners are out. No one would do that. You want bits of metal going down so folks can't escape. That metal doesn't go out of date. There's some great questions here, by the way.
Yeah, there are many great. Which one do we want to pick? Because there is one which is the AR thing, because of where Apple is going. So I don't know where Apple is going, but I can tell that many
Apple don't know
like
where Apple are going.
social networks or whatever are going, and I'm always I'm pretty sure that in the future, if you are a teenager and you want to know if the people in front of you is free or not, it's not going to be like back in our days, but you will know it by AR because it's going to display like on the second layer the information about this person. Where Apple is going, what do you guys think? With obviously some kind of glasses or lenses or whatever, obviously.
I think they're doing the first steps now with having ARKit in place. So we fill the stores with cool tech demos right now in games and whatsoever. And the next step will be a device then. So that's my guess. Because when the device is coming, you already have great apps in place or valuable apps in place. And this is basically their big testing playground currently. So what are people coming up with? What are their ideas? And that the tech which is in place right now on ARKit and ARKit 2 is enormous, but it has its flaws because you always need light. It doesn't work in dimmed conditions, for example. So there are a lot of restrictions there. But yeah, I think it's basically apps now, device very soon.
It reminds me of the watch. I actually stopped wearing a watch, like an analog watch, when I was 12. And restarted wearing a watch in 2015 when the Apple Watch came. So I never wear glasses because up until now my view is okay, but pretty soon it won't be that okay anymore anyway, so I will have to wear glasses. But many people, even young people, will at one point wear glasses, not to fix their view, but just for the AR stuff.
Yeah, I agree about, I know some people who wear regular glasses. They don't need any visual aid. They just like the way it looks. So definitely for technology like AR. About what you said about the AR apps, I agree. The main thing is that it's really incredible technology. I just feel like there aren't that many applications yet where people find it super useful. And I think that's going to be a big stepping stone before people agree to have their life immersed that way. And the second thing is that there has already been a gigantic failure of the Google glasses that tried to do something similar. They did do it with a very weird looking device. They didn't look at all like glasses and made people always look sideways. But yeah, I think it would be a very hard task to get some of these consumers' confidence again, because people who use the Google glasses mostly were unhappy with it eventually down the line. And to get these people back, again, excited about this stuff would be a difficult task.
And I think as well that with the Apple Watch, I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a lot of Android watches that came out before for maybe 2 years, and they saw everything that other companies failed at, and they took the best of everything. They put the Apple Touch, they did everything, and so at the end, the product was amazing. So I think Apple is obviously going to wait that other people fail to make a great product as well, to see because as well as now, I think one of the biggest problems is currently the component size, so like battery, like everything, to have something that you can actually wear for a full day, because maybe we're going to see first in like a compact AR glasses having 2 hours battery, but it's not going to be enough, you know what I mean? So I think there's this, and also as well with ARKit, what they're doing is that currently they succeeded to have the biggest AR platform with 350 million compatible devices compatible on the AR Apple platform. And also they're trying to get as many apps, so they have the biggest app market as well, and they're trying to get all the developers on it. So once there are glasses, developers will, creators and developers, both of them, as it's a very creative field, so there's a lot of people also coming up from other fields, will be ready and will use actually the technologies that Apple developed all along the way. So that's what I think.
I think even if tomorrow Apple came out and delivered technologically perfect glasses, I think the market would be a little bit like, what's that for? Like, I think what's going to happen is, thanks to like ARKit and developers embracing ARKit now on iOS devices, at some point we're going to hit a pressure point where, hopefully, we're going to hit a pressure point where the market's going to be ready for it and be like, okay, so I think we want the glasses now.
We have about 10 minutes still left, so
Paul wants to talk about Swift evolution, I think. You want to answer
exactly.
the Swift evolution.
I think Paul is like burning on his seat to answer that question about what's the panel's participants' opinion of Swift evolution. Any message for the Swift Score team? You sure have no message for the Swift Score team.
I've got stacks of messages for them. So I think broadly it's working. I mean, Swift's definitely evolving. So in that sense, it's definitely working. 4.2, officially a minor release, but it has some fantastic functionality in there, like case iterables in there, and it's absolutely brilliant. The new random frameworks in there, and that's absolutely brilliant. Hash warning and hash errors in there. And of course, Swift 5 is coming out whenever with things like raw strings and future enum cases, count where, compact map values. I mean, there's great things coming up the pipeline. I think it continues to be an unnecessarily hostile environment. I think looking at the toggle method that got added to Booleans in 4.2 was a great example of where we're still going wrong as a community. And that was done by Chris Eidhoff, who is hugely respected and had to put up with a great amount of flaming on the forums. And fine, okay, he's been through the wars already, he could handle that, but most folks wouldn't put up with that and would go away. So I think it's a fairly toxic environment still. I'm not sure if you noticed that this year, one of Apple's Swift package manager teams, Ankit Agarwal, released a utility framework as part of Package Manager. And in there includes some nice things like ordered sets. I said, hey, Ankit, this is really cool. Put that into Swift Evolution, please. And he said, I'm afraid of Swift Evolution. And he works at Apple, doing Swift Package Manager. So if he wouldn't do it, then who else is being put off by that? So Evolution is working and that Swift's evolving. I think it's still necessarily hostile and aggressive. As for the messages for the core team, I bother them all the time, like face to face. I went to try Swift San Jose and cornered Ted Kremenek and Ted, we've got to talk. Because the Swift's core team has utterly failed at their premise, quite frankly. They've said very clearly, 2.5 years ago on their website, everyone on the core team works at Apple because of Swift's beginnings at Apple. But over time, we'll bring on board diverse members from the community to make it more diverse. And that was 2.5 years ago, and all that's changed is that Chris Latner left Apple. That's it. Everyone else is a white guy at Apple, under 45 or so. And that is pathetic, quite frankly. Apple, you've got to do better.
And by the way, at the same time, you can also answer the question, because they're related to, are the advantages of Swift being open source? Which one are that affect your day-to-day work?
Did you want to continue with that?
No, you can start first.
So, everything Paul said, yes. But,
That's a good name for a domain name. Let me reserve that. Everythingpaulsaid.com.
But, for people, and many of us have, who've been around a long time and saw what it took to get Java open sourced, and it took a fight with Apache, and it took them kicking and screaming, and then the JSRs after that, it was companies that ran JSRs, it wasn't individuals. And the fact that in Swift Evolution, individuals can get stuff committed to Swift, the fact combining open source and Swift Evolution, that we can see what's coming in Swift is huge. That's a transparency we don't get from Apple in any other product that they ship. And so the fact that we can look ahead and prepare ourselves for what's coming, that we can read the manifestos and see what's coming in generics and how they're doing. The Swift team, forget Swift Evolution, sometimes participates in Twitter in some deep ways. And the conversation on Twitter, there's great insights there. And so, not contradicting anything Paul said, because all these things do need to be addressed, but Eclipse was this way for a long time, where Eclipse, the only committers were at IBM for the longest time. And, eventually they took in people from other. Swift is still very young. People forget that. When Swift first was released, people criticized Apple for releasing it too soon, and others criticized Apple for releasing it too late, that we should have seen it from the beginning. A lot of these other languages like Go, they have someone really driving it. If you look at C# compared to Java, Microsoft basically said, we're not open sourcing it, and they made great progress that the Java community had been stuck at that point, and the language was stagnating. And Microsoft came in and wrote this clean room and drove it ahead with a very strong internal vision of what it should be. You see languages like Python that have been through that, and PHP and other, Perl until it purled, that benefit from that. So I don't mind having a company with vision driving it through. And you can see now that Lattner is at Google, that some of what he wants from the language are very different, and maybe that will push the language. But when the language shipped, we were told it was going to be firmware. We were told it was going to be for the desktop, for the laptop, for the server. It was going to be everything, a scripting language. And it really hasn't developed in all those ways, and they're still, I think, trying to figure out what it needs to be.
Just a note about what you said about Lattner at Google. That already happened in a way, right? Like I think it was the dynamic type membership that they built their own fork of Swift for their machine learning stuff, and Google and Apple have come to a disagreement on whether this should be part of Swift, a very strongly typed language, and eventually they agreed that it's better to join forces. So even outside of Apple, Lattner is still very, very strong influence. And you mentioned Try Swift San Jose. He was there. He's still a very strong member of that community for sure.
He was there in a panel full of white men. It's pathetic.
Yeah.
I'm not really angry. So on the open source front, Swift is open source. Go and read the source code. The Swift standard library is written in Swift. I'm doing a whole talk on this in like 2 weeks' time in Poland, because the Swift standard library is extraordinarily powerful, extraordinarily flexible. It's the most beautiful Swift most we'll ever see. So go and dig through and go, whoa, it's so clever, it's so shiny, because it really is. Go and look up, for example, the ampersand function, which does, binary and it's one line of code. The entire thing is one line of code because of Swift's brilliant features. And you go, well, that's really clever. And you sort of appreciate how clever it is. Look up the new all satisfy method from 4.2. It's like, ooh, it's so clever. It really is.
Ooh. I think we'll close on that. Ooh. That's a good way to close. You want to say
Common
something?
room, ooh.
All right. I think we're good now for right, Andreas. We're good for now for eating now. So the food is there. There's still some beer, and we have actually more than only in the fridge, and other stuff. And now we're gonna have a very nice time all together. But first of all, let's give all those guys an amazing round of applause.
Yeah, right. Well done.